All right. Well, guys, thanks for joining me today. I want to show you this new Excel, this Excel API connection I've done with Orchestrator for JD Edwards. I know this would be great for importing data into the system en masse, or even getting data out of the system. So I got a couple here I want to show you. One for the address book, one for putting Z records into the 9/11 Z table, creating some journal entries, and then exporting data out. Going to take a look at getting data out of the 9/11 into an Excel so you can work with it. If an accountant needs to slice and dice the data, they can pull it out easily into Excel using Orchestrator as well. And the last one we're going to take a look at is doing price book. Usually putting in branch plant items and a quantity, pulling the prices out and quantity available out of the system right into Excel. So here we go.
That's sweet. Is this live? I mean, this is live, right? Where you're pulling directly from the system live, or is it go through like a batch file?
Well, the first one here goes directly. It goes through the Z process for the address book, but it does update it live. So we'll put for this particular one, I can put these. I'll put these three in here. I can actually even add a fourth one if you want to add, like, I don't know, Mr. Blue here. You can see that, and you can see the number of entries will actually go up to 4. I had a Mr. Blue, sorry, Mr. Yellow. And then I'll put in, so you can see here that we have 4 entries now. So the system the Excel already knows how many entries we're going to be putting in. And all I do here is I got this hooked up to an orchestration. So all these variables are defined within the orchestration. Excel, using the Visual Basic code, knows that these are inputs, so it's going to grab all this data. As soon as I click this button, a bunch of macros will go off, and we'll actually get data returned from the system. It'll tell us the user ID inputting it, which happens to be me, the address book number that it creates, the date and time that it created these entries into the address book. So all I've been doing here is just clicking a button. It's going to kick off a bunch of macros and put this data right into the system. And I can show you on the other screen as it's doing this. So as it's going, I can here show you that if it's refreshing. There's our address book. So now we have these 4 entries that just came into the system from Excel. You can see here we got returned the user ID, the date and time. So right now it's 11/12 on November 12th at 5:32. It entered them in, so just a minute ago. You can see that those automatically went right into the system. So actually,
hey Anthony, I have a question. What is the data validation process in the Excel worksheet? Let's say you have some of the search types there. Let's say I put in a value that is not consistent with UDC setup. Is there anything in the Excel document that's going to trigger a response prior to loading it into JDE?
So you don't see it here, but the response that the orchestration sends is a JSON. One of the macros here that takes that, one of the macros I have built into this these subroutines is that it parses that JSON out into these fields. If it didn't successfully process, we would get an error. And I'll kind of show you that with one of these other ones. Not that an error, but you can see a status. I have that hidden, so this is a kind of a clean copy of what it looks like. But if there was a problem with the orchestration, we would get a response back. I believe it's 500 that says the orchestration didn't work or it errored out. Get that response back for that data validation. So like if we had like a queue, if there's no search type queue, it would bomb out, and it could still keep going though. The orchestration would move on to the next line.
Perfect, and that answers my next question, which is, does it continue in the script, or does it send like an exception report, triggering some kind of corrective action in the spreadsheet? But sounds good.
So you can do it either way. Actually, the way the orchestrator is set up, you can have it stop on an error or have it just continue through the error and keep it going. So I have it to keep going.
So you can define that.
Right.
Excellent.
Yeah. So that's, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to ask, right? So this is sweet, and it's something you've been talking about for a while in terms of, essentially keying in data from an external source, in this case, Excel, having Orchestrator map it to JD Edwards and write records and essentially return back. So we could have stayed in the Excel and we would have seen that those user IDs pop up once the records were created. Super crazy, super cool. My thought is, like, right, you've said a couple of things, Anthony, that seem really kind of scary almost, right? You said a bunch of macros. You said JSON. Maybe people might not understand Orchestrator. I mean, we're here because we love Orchestrator, but we're trying to see what we can do with it. But can you share just like how technical was this? I mean, did you write code? Did you how much time did this or effort did this kind of take to do this? I mean, there's a lot of stuff happening behind the scenes, it feels like.
Yeah, there's a couple of moving parts. So initially I set up the orchestration, which has just a couple of components, couple of form requests to get the data into the system. That alone probably took an hour and a half, maybe 2 hours, and most of the time is testing to make sure everything works correctly. And then I went into Excel, and I built the script for the Visual Basic. Now, the same script can be used multiple times over, but you just have to define the inputs, and I use the same inputs and variables that I did for the orchestration, because you need to map those correctly. And then using API, which probably is not a scary word, grabbing that endpoint and mapping the Excel script to that orchestration itself probably took me maybe another 2 or 3 hours. I spent more time on the macros themselves and recording them, fine-tuning them to parse out the JSON and make sure the button works correctly. But that was probably the bulk of the time, was just testing that, the macros themselves. Getting the systems to talk to each other didn't take all that long. So, to answer your question.
Cool. Yeah, I mean, well, it does. I mean, I'm not super familiar with more like complicated macros, maybe some simple ones in Excel, but then even like Visual Basic. Is that something that you have background in, or is that something that you was intuitive enough to kind of figure out for what you were trying to do with it here?
I didn't have a background in it, but I was able to find the right resources to help me move it along so I could get what I needed out of it.
Okay. So it's not super, it sounds like it wasn't super complicated. You weren't writing code necessarily, like lots of lines of code to do this.
No, it's pretty straightforward. Yeah, it was just probably a few lines. And this basic understanding of how object-oriented coding works, basically. And I mean, once you start kind of playing around with it, this first one took me the longest, but the other ones took less time along the way. As I'll show you these other ones, it took me less time to do those because I already had a good understanding with the first one.
But, hey, Anthony.
Yeah, so this... Good.
Sorry. Thanks, Roy. I was just going to piggyback off your last question and talk about, or ask Anthony if he could talk a little bit about the connection that he's using as the mechanism to transfer the data into JD Edwards. I know there's probably a lot of interested parties in terms of how you got the Excel to talk to JDE. That piece, obviously we see that you're interactively using the spreadsheet, you're updating it with values, you're selecting a button, and as Dwight mentions, there's a lot going on behind that button. If you could just talk a little bit about how you got the Excel document to talk to JD Edwards?
Sure. So it's mostly Visual Basic. Visual Basic coding and scripting. I was able to take a template that communicates that you define the endpoint of the orchestration. So that initially, through that API, it calls the server that's sitting on, and then it kicks off the orchestration. And then after that, within the script, it pulls in all the variables that I've defined within the script. So the variables were alpha name, search type, city, state, postal code, country. I defined those as inputs into that API, and it took the values that are in this spreadsheet here and put those into the orchestration and just ran through the orchestration as you normally would if you were doing it from the system. And then the orchestration itself responded back to Excel with a JSON script, which I created a macro to parse out into these 4 columns here. I defined that output within the orchestration. So I could have, if I didn't want to see user ID, I just wanted to see address book number, date, and time, I could have defined that within orchestration. I chose these 4 as out. And once I defined that, it sent it to Excel. and then I parsed it out so we could see that here in this table.
Excellent, excellent. And so to get a better understanding, you're parsing the data through the Excel VBA script, which is being passed into a REST API endpoint with JD Edwards. The AIS is the endpoint host. And from there, you're sending those inputs, which have been parsed, into series of form requests, different actions that you've set up within your orchestration, and then you're using the output of the orchestration to point back to the VBA script and pull back that form data. Is that how I understood it?
Yep, pretty much. Yep. Exactly. So it's using the REST API to connect to the AIS server to call that orchestration, sending the inputs that are in the blue table here as inputs in the orchestration, and then we're receiving a response as a JSON back from that AIS server into Excel, and then the macro is parsing out that JSON. I think macros in Excel parse out Excel and JSON. There's a function in there to do either one of those. Sorry, XML and JSON, and I use the JSON parsing, and it does it as you need it to.
Hey, Anthony,
awesome.
I've got a question kind of related to another area of this, right? So I think, this looks like it's got a lot of cool applications with like MDM and master data management, stuff. And I think, so like, how can you build like a little bit more like master data management workflow or controls into this? Can you hook up like an email or something so somebody would get notified when something like this runs?
Absolutely, yeah. So for orchestration, as part of the orchestration, we could easily put in. Well, let me step back one piece a little bit, because like I said before, this uses the Z process. I'm going into the 101, the FO101Z table. So if we didn't want the records to process fully and commit to the live table, we could stop it there at that Z process, create a notification or an email as part of the orchestration, send it to maybe somebody in a master data management role, say, hey, these records were entered in through Excel. Do you want them to be committed to the table? Maybe have a hyperlink in that email or notification that'll take them to the job, maybe that will commit the records to the system. And you could easily do something like that. So notify somebody by creating a notification or an email through through the orchestrator.
Yeah, so if I understand you correctly, right? So if you wanted to like workflow this a little bit more, you could kind of stage and park the data in the Z files, and then kick off the notification. Somebody gets informed, they can review it, and boom, now they can just process it in and or approve it and kick off another orchestration. So no, that's really cool.
Definitely.
What other types of like where do you see the future of this going? Like what do you think is next? How can you expand and build on this to make this more effective?
That's a pretty open-ended question, Mo. I think for me, I get excited because phones are the wave of the future. It seems like your personal device in your hand, right? I think it would be honestly cool to take a hold of these API connections with Orchestrator. Excel is kind of showing what they can do as a third party, putting data into JD Edwards via the Orchestrator. But if we take Excel out of it and maybe use an application on your phone that you could create through Visual Builder, a new tool that Oracle's releasing for Enterprise One, and maybe have a QR code on a business card. You could scan that QR code with your phone. That information from that business card gets put into the address book just like this does through inputs and things like that. And then automatically you have a new business contact in your JD Edwards CRM system or something like that to follow up with. I think that's kind of the next step. Excel shows the possibilities with API, but I think it's just kind of a placeholder for that new thing that we can plug in there, be it a web page app or an app on your phone, something like that.
That's such a cool idea. Actually, recently I had a client approach me and say, hey, they have this requirement where they do like these field sales, right? And these salespeople go out and they're trying to add like who's who contacts in their phones, but they don't really have any way to be able to do this from their phones directly to JD Edwards. So I think this would be a really cool way to add either address books or who's who records right into JD. So no, this is really cool, man.
Absolutely. Or even if you're out in the field at a construction site and one of your subs gives you an invoice, you could take a picture of that with your phone, that invoice could be the data could be extracted from that, and through a web app that you created on your phone, and then and a voucher could be created in the system just like that through Orchestrator as well. So I think there's a lot of possibilities with these API connections. We just got to find the right case and explore it.
Yeah, this is cool. So essentially what you've shown us is a way to connect JD Edwards externally. Honestly, some of that extra stuff we talked through in terms of the macros, Visual Basic, right? Some of that's specific to this example, connecting on the Excel side, honestly, but just showing that Orchestrator is building the record in JD Edwards side. It doesn't matter what the external source is, essentially, that you're demonstrating. We can map in the values into the Orchestrator, and then it can write, in this case, an address book record. So that's super cool. I like the idea of like the workflow and how that can be built in. We all have clients, right, that do external address book forms. They pass around to different departments before they have someone manually key it into the system. And this just shows we can connect an external form as generic as an Excel file even, and have a button that they can now spin through approval. They've routed it, and now they've got records in JD Edwards. It's super cool. So I think you had some other examples, Anthony. Is this
Anthony, one quick question there, but do you mind showing the records again in JD Edwards?
Sure. Actually, you know what? Let me do one thing. Let me just show you, because I think I went through it real quick. Let me delete the ones that we have here. Mm-hmm. I'll show you some, and then, so we have nothing here. I'm refreshing. I got nothing here with the Mr. in the name. I'll go back here. I'll just show you guys real quick. I'll clear that out. Click the button so that it'll add the records back into the system for me. And just a second. And there's ways to speed this up. I don't have, I guess you might call post-processing done on this, where I would make it even faster, or where we wouldn't get the white screen. There's ways to make it more efficient, but you can see here, and added in these 4 records again. The date and time lines up with what I have on my computer. If I hit the refresh, we got them back in the system again. So this first one has address book number 78705. Boom, we have it right here in the grid.
Gotcha.
That's
awesome.
So the next one I wanted to show you guys was journal entries. Say you're a cost accountant or staff accountant, and it's day 2 of month-end close. You need to do an adjusting entry or an accrual. You've got all your information in an Excel spreadsheet. If you just, instead of going into the system to create and copying and pasting all that into the grid, hitting the save, I mean, that would work just fine, but maybe you don't want to be going back and forth between the screens, or pasting into the grids, a little cumbersome sometimes. You could have it all right here. Say I have this journal entry here for $20, and then it's offset with 2 $10 transactions. From here, let me go and show you real quick in the system. This actually hits the Z table, and I don't commit it to the actual 911 table. It's still sitting in here. So this might be where we want to add in some workflow to where maybe an assistant controller would want to approve these before they get into the system. I'll just show you real quick. So I got nothing here with the GL data today. Oh, sorry. I want this date. So nothing with today's date. From here, I have these 3 transactions. And see here, what we were talking about a little bit before with the last one. Here's where the Json response will come in a status. So we're looking for a status 200 here, which would mean successful. So I'm just going to hit the button, and it'll send the data over. You can see it's kind of telling us what it's doing. In the meantime, it's giving us a batch number, which the macro will populate to all 3 lines. And you can have multiple lines, so you can see it's showing just a line count of anything after the first one. So we have a bit of a JSON response here. It kind of shows us what it's doing. It's calling this form request, and it's doing some updates to that Z table. And then we're getting a status of 200, which means everything was successful. And if I flip back over to the system, hit a refresh on here, now we have that batch, which was just created, which is 567, same one that we got here. And then when you open that up, it should be 3 lines. Yep, 20, 10, and 10. And then we got ourselves a transaction here in the system from Excel. And from here, maybe a controller or even the person that created the entry could go in here and make sure everything came over correctly and commit it to the table. That's another way to get data into the system.
Yeah,
that's really cool. And so Anthony, like, what are other ways that you can get data into this Excel sheet? I mean, is there, is this something like you can populate out to people, have them fill it out, send it back to you, and then you can just do like one map? How do you scale this up to do more than just one set of journal entries?
We could. It depends on how you want to build out the template. I could add more lines to this. They don't all have to be within the same ADI transaction. I can have a second line here, but they could all be within the same batch. If you wanted to do maybe a budget, if you wanted to populate a budget instead of actuals, you could just simply do that here. But you could create a form or a template within JD Edwards and send this out to folks, and we could have the buttons on there, share it with them. I have in this home tab is a username and password, which every one of these macros is using as it's essentially logging into the system and creating a token for me to use through the orchestration. So if you want to have one of these for each one of your accountants or staff accountants, they would have to have their own access to JD Edwards, but this you would just store it here, and they could easily, once they have that, they could have this data sent into the system just like I'm doing it now. So you could scale this up just mainly by saving and copying out to whoever needed it. And the way I had the tables built, they are populated. So if you just create another line here, I could tab here, and it just creates another line below that, and you can keep adding to it as needed.
So wow, I could really scale this up a lot. I could, and based on whether I've got staff accountants or whether I've got whoever's doing the journal entries, I can send a copy of this to them. And as long as they're populating the data incorrectly, and because it's all going into the Z file, that validation is still there too. So, and I've got another layer of checking. So this is really cool. I think this would be an awesome way to scale up some and do a bunch of journal entries from outside of JDE.
Absolutely.
Hey, Anthony, and kind of in the same vein, but in terms of error handling, is that also built into the spreadsheet? In terms of, but you'd be notified if there was an error, but the orchestration would continue on to the next row?
So I built a pretty slimmed down version. You could certainly add an error handling. The first step of error handling would be these responses you got here. If something didn't jive, if maybe we had this account number doesn't exist, we would get an error within the JSON response, and we get I believe it's API status of 500. So that would be your first level. Now we could certainly build in a piece of the orchestration to again do a notification or an email to let the person know that's hitting the button here that they had an error when they were trying to kick off that orchestration.
Gotcha. That's awesome.
So you can set up a notification to piggyback off of that JSON response for errors, if I understand that correctly.
Yeah, actually, yeah, absolutely. So if it's going through the components of the orchestration and it has an error, you could have the notification at that point sent to the user doing it. You wouldn't necessarily see it here in Excel, but if we had it like an email notification, they could see it pop up on their screen that way. And there's other ways we can do it. Maybe, and again, this is a slimmed down version. There's an opportunity to have a dialog box pop up that could probably show you the error from that as well. That we could parse out the JSON that way. So there's other ways to do it.
Excellent. Yeah, I see a lot of value. I have quite a few plant and equipment maintenance clients that struggle in the area of time entry, automating processes. Here we offer them, that ability to be able to process multiple records and then, like you said, stage it. So I don't have to necessarily process all the way through to the 911 for the entries. I could actually have them staged for the journal review, and then pass them on. Investigate them further if there's any additional entries that I need to add to the file prior to upload, or I could just pass it along. But I really like this in terms of automation and what that brings to that area that I see consistently from a lot of our CAM clients.
I think that'd be a great use case, especially if you were having a web app or something like that where they could clock in and clock out on their phone. And then, as soon as they clock out, it sends in that amount of time into the system, and they wouldn't have to worry about logging in or do anything like that. You can even do it by location, how close you are to the actual workplace. It automatically clocks you when you get close enough to it, something like that, depending on how you design the web app. But I think there's a lot of applications for something like this, to where, yes, the Enterprise One system is great to capture all the ERP components that you need, but maybe someone in the field doesn't want to get that technical, doesn't want to get in the system that often. There's lots of applications for folks to be able to do things like that from their phone.
Definitely. I think one more point I would want to add to this before we move along here would be regarding areas like exception reporting and some of the errors that we would see returned in the JSON response. I think a good point to note here as well would be that we could utilize the orchestration rules to do things like checks for duplication prior to loading any of the Excel data. Maybe we have an item master, item branch record that we're trying to automate some additional setups, using the orchestrator, and maybe some of those item numbers already exist. So, this just points back to, that exception reporting and how we can utilize some of the rules to mitigate some of those issues.
Absolutely. I think that's a great use case.
Yeah, Anthony, I mean, all this is super good. I think this is our this is one of our orchestrator advanced conversations. But you're right, the possibilities, and just those are good examples, Jordan, thinking through a specific area that we've seen a lot of people have issues because it's field work, right? And how do we connect something where they might not have great connectivity? Well, how can they store their data in Excel maybe, or some other application, and then when they're ready, they can send it in. This is an awesome opportunity for it. So Anthony, I mean, thanks for showing this stuff.